Hello and welcome to Get Focused Millennial Matters, Episode 10, Sweet, Sweet Democracy. I am your host, Kinyo Laditan. Our organization, Growing Empowered Together, or GET for short, connects the dots between personal experiences and public policy in order to motivate more young people to vote and volunteer in Texas. Today's feature highlights two formidable advocates of voting rights and civic engagement. This show is a dialogue on voting, democracy, and advocacy. We'll discuss the real impact of public policy at the ballot box and the trials and tribulations of living in a sweet, sweet democracy. Our two guests are Drew Galloway and Beth Stevens. Drew is Executive Director of Move San Antonio, a nonpartisan grassroots nonprofit organization building power in underrepresented youth communities through civic education, leadership, development, and issue advocacy. Beth is an attorney and the Voting Rights Program Director of the Texas Civil Rights Project. Welcome, Drew and Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Drew, your work focuses on the millennial population. What's the mission of Move San Antonio?
Move San Antonio gives young people a voice in our democracy. So from voting and advocacy out in the community all the way through getting involved at City Hall, Move helps shepherd young people through that process.
Drew, the website for Move says we're bringing sweet, sweet democracy to the masses. What is democracy and why is democracy so very sweet?
Democracy is sweet because it's all about the people deciding their own choices about how their community is governed.
Awesome. Beth, you've built your career around the effort to ensure that every eligible voter in Texas has equitable access to our democratic system of government. So we'd like to ask you the same question. Why is democracy so very sweet?
It's so very sweet, very similar to what Drew said. It's government for the people, by the people. And kind of the crux of that is participation by all eligible people to the fullest extent in our democracy.
Yeah.
And then that creates a government that is reflective of those people.
Awesome. Beth, who has the legal right to vote in Texas?
So in Texas, you have to be 18 years old or older to vote. You have to be a United States citizen and a Texas resident. You cannot have been found to be mentally incapacitated, or if you have been found to be partially mentally incapacitated, basically a court can't have taken away your right to vote. You can't have a felony conviction, or if you do have a felony conviction, you must be off paper. So after you're done with probation and after you're out of prison.
Okay. Beth, roughly how many Texans who are legally eligible to vote are being involuntarily shut out from the democratic process?
Back in 2016, there were 17.52 million people in Texas that were of voting age and were citizens, so eligible to vote. Only 15.02 of those folks were actually registered to vote. We estimate 4.4 million people in Texas actually can't cast a ballot that counts because of voter registration issues. And that's just on the voter registration front.
Which eligible voters are being shut out by public policy decisions?
So back in 2016, only 25% of the eligible population between 18 and 24 years old actually voted.
Wow.
And we know that half of those voters are people of color. And so you can see based on voter turnout that we are shutting out of our democratic process people of color, poor people, and young people.
So Beth, the percentage of eligible voters in Texas who cast their ballots in our elections is often described with words such as anemic or pathetic. Can you help our audience understand why all Texans should care about an even smaller fraction of eligible voters who are left behind?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question for folks to dig down deeper into.
Yeah.
One is, it's actually not a small number of people who are being shut out. We're talking about millions of Texans who are eligible to vote who aren't being able to cast a vote that counts.
Right.
And then two, this is really two sides to the same coin here. We've got policies and laws that make voter suppression and voter intimidation a reality for folks in Texas. And then on the other side to that, we've got kind of voter apathy and, my vote doesn't count mentality.
Yeah.
But the first side of the coin feeds the second side. The intimidation efforts and efforts to suppress the vote of young people and people of color feeds into this loop where people think that their vote doesn't matter.
Give us a sense of the scope of the problem. Is voter access obstructed during voter registration, during the election itself, or after the election when the votes are being counted?
It's actually, very unfortunately, all three of those places.
Oh, wow.
I sometimes call it the triangle of voter suppression. We've got a voter registration process in Texas that makes it difficult for third-party voter registration, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And then secondly, we've got laws and policies that make it hard for people once they get to the ballot box to actually cast a ballot, so photo ID law, for example. And then third kind of prong of the triangle is gerrymandering. Redistricting in Texas has been used to keep people's votes from actually counting, even if they do get to cast the vote.
Wow. Who has the authority to rid our state from the systemic barriers that exclude millions of people from the ballot box?
Our elected officials on the local level, the state level, and the federal government level.
If democracy is so sweet, then why hasn't the political leadership of Texas already resolved the voter access problems that have soured the democratic process in our state?
I'm going to go back to the very first answer to your first question. It takes participation by as many eligible people as possible for the government to reflect the policies that the people actually want. Right now, participation is down so much that special interest groups are actually who's in control of our government levers. And that's why the issues that come up for people for voter suppression and voter intimidation haven't been fixed, because they are put there on purpose.
So Drew, why is it so important that the millennial generation in particular become more active in the democratic process right now?
Well, Kinyo, millennials, who we define as like sort of 18 to 35-year-olds, are really the largest, most diverse generation in American history. And there's so many of us that, want change in government.
Yeah.
There's a lot of issues that millennials and our generation really care about that's not being discussed right now in places like City Hall and in Austin. And the more that we get involved, the more that those will be amplified. So say, for instance, public transportation was one of the top issues in the 2017 city election. And because more young people got involved in that election, those issues of multimodal transportation and what light rail would look like in San Antonio all came to the forefront, and that was all youth-led.
What are two of the most common excuses that you hear young people give for why they don't vote?
There's two reasons young people don't vote. One is my vote doesn't matter, and then two is voting is too difficult. And we work to tackle both of those reasons every single day with young people.
Drew, let's see if you can help us bust those myths and break some bad habits.
Well, if you look at it, especially at the hyper-local level, city elections, school board elections, judicial races, there are so few people that actually vote in those elections that you can have an amplified voice. So if young people get involved in a city election for city council or mayor, the turnout rate in San Antonio is only about 12.5% to 13% for a race like that. So young people can have a huge, huge voice. And then also, because so few people actually vote in those races, they're determined by a really small amount. So we've seen races in the city election and at the county level that are won by 6 and 12 and 15 votes. So in that case, your voice really, really matters.
Awesome. Drew, the very first step is to get eligible voters registered. What's on the registration form itself?
Absolutely. So we see voter registration as the entry, like the first step for young people and all people across our city and our state to get involved in the electoral process. And when you fill that application out, it's got just basic information: your name, your address, the county where you live at, an identifier, whether that's your last 4 your social security number or your driver's license number, and then your signature. So it really takes like 1.5 to 2 minutes to fill out total.
Oh man. Okay, Drew, what if a person has confidential questions or just needs help filling out the form?
As Beth mentioned, Texas is one of the hardest states to do voter registration in, and that's because we don't really have like an electronic online system. So a lot of the voter registration that's actually done in Texas is done face-to-face, and Move San Antonio does that work every single day. So when I'm registering you to vote, I'm there as a volunteer voter deputy, and so I can answer any questions that you might have about the form itself, or how to get registered, or maybe what your next steps are. Or you can go to the Secretary of State's website and find out a lot more information on like how to get registered and how to participate.
Awesome. So Drew, that looks pretty straightforward. Where can eligible voters in Texas get their registration forms?
Absolutely. So there's a couple different ways. So you can register when you change your driver's license over. You can request a mail-in form, and it'll be sent to you, and you can mail it in. You can do it online and then print it out, sign it, and mail it to the Secretary of State's website. Or if you're on a college campus or in a high school or at any of the community events, you can see Move San Antonio organizers, and we will help you fill it out and then turn it in for you.
Awesome. Beth, you work to make voter registration accessible to more eligible voters. Do state agencies such as the Department of Public Safety have a legal responsibility to participate in the effort to register eligible voters?
They absolutely do. They are required under a 1993 federal law known as the Motor Voter Law to offer voter registration to people who transact with them every time.
Is the Texas Department of Public Safety currently upholding its legal responsibility to make voter registration more accessible? And if not, what is being done to intervene and demand that our state agencies do their part to encourage democracy?
So DPS is currently not in full compliance with that law. As Drew said, if you go in person to get your driver's license, they do ask that question on the driver's license form, and voter registration occurs kind of seamlessly after that. The problem is if you go online to transact with DPS, which you're allowed to do to renew your license every other time, so every 6 years, and then to change your address. And we actually had a really great win in court a couple of weeks ago. The court found that Texas should be offering this voter registration for the 1.5 million Texans who transact with DPS online each year.
Wow. Beth, can you tell us about your efforts to enforce Texas high school registration laws? What are most Texas high schools failing to do, and what can be done about it?
So the good news is Texas has a really great law that goes back to 1985 that requires high schools, all of them, public and private, to offer voter registration to eligible students twice a school year. And so eligible students means someone who is 17 years and 10 months old or older. And so, we've got thousands of seniors graduating each year that are eligible to register to vote. The bad news is that by and large schools have historically not provided the voter registration that they're supposed to be. And there's kind of a number of reasons for this. One is they don't know that it's the law. And then two is the state has not done a great job of helping facilitate this voter registration. And then three, sometimes you have schools that are unwilling to do it. And so what TCRP has done is undertaken a nonpartisan campaign to push this law in a way that schools will find it easier to offer voter registration to these students, to require the state to make this easier. There are kind of simple measures that the state could put in place that they have refused to do thus far that would make it easier for high school principals. And then three, just getting the youth that Move San Antonio focuses on so well engaged generally in our democratic process.
Yeah. Okay. Drew, your organization is also working to engage more high school students in the democratic process. Why is the effort to register high school students so very important?
It absolutely is like paramount because we know that like voting is a habit. So the more that a person votes, the more comfortable they get with the process and the more likely they're going to do it in the future. So if we can get young voters like in that process and understanding the different mechanisms, they will vote earlier and more often than waiting 5-10 years and then becoming engaged citizens.
The majority of eligible non-voters in Texas are already registered to vote, but have voluntarily decided to opt out of the democratic process. What are the challenges of fighting back against voter apathy, and what is the reward?
Ultimately, it's not only just enough to get the unregistered voters registered, but also to get the registered voters out to vote. And so what we're doing is we're like working on that second reason why young people don't vote. Voting is too difficult to actually help us get people out. And so we help teach them about the process. We help them understand issues that are important to them. And then we use that as a way to mobilize them going forward to the polls.
Okay, how can a person find out when the next election is and where she needs to go in order to vote?
You can go to the Bexar County Elections website, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, but then also you can follow like Texas Civil Rights Project online, you can follow Move San Antonio on social media, and we will actually help remind you like that elections are coming up, or this is what this election's for, and invite you to events that are great like learning opportunities.
Will she always be able to vote at the same election day polling place year after year?
Kinyo, it's a good rule of thumb that she should always verify where her polling location is, because if she voted in early voting, you can vote anywhere across the county. But if you vote on election day, you have to vote at your assigned precinct. And at sometimes whenever precincts get too large, they might separate those and your polling place can change. So you can go directly to the Bexar County Elections website and find out where your polling place is and verify that before each election.
Can a voter just throw on his Quack for President t-shirt, grab his iPhone, head to the polls to take some selfies and sing his favorite campaign songs?
Kinyo, there's a lot of rules when it comes to voting, and you just hit on 3 of them. So you can't wear any campaign or candidate branded materials inside the polling location. You can't bring your cell phone within the barrier of 100 feet. So when you get to the polling location, you got to put your cell phone away, and then you can't take any photos inside the polling location itself. Those are all Texas Election Code rules.
Okay. Drew, can you walk a first-time voter through the voting experience at the polling location? What happens in there?
It's actually really, really easy. And a lot of first-time voters have some anxiety about like voting for the first or second time. So once you park, you'll enter the building. When you walk up, they'll ask you for your ID. There's a couple different versions of IDs that you can find out about at the Secretary of State's website. But once you hand them your ID, they'll verify your voter registration and your identity. They'll hand you your ID back, and then they'll carry you over to the polling location machine. When you're in the polling booth, they'll verify that you're in the correct precinct, and then they'll step away. They'll let you vote electronically. Once you hit confirm and your ballot's sent, then you walk back, grab your I voted sticker, and you're all done.
Awesome. Drew, sometimes computers can frustrate even the most tech-savvy person. Is your average millennial likely to get confused and need some help when she faces a voting machine for the first time?
Absolutely not, Kinyo. These voting machines are really, really simple. If you can work your cell phone, or if you can work Facebook or anything like that, you can absolutely work on these voting machines. It's mostly just hit the candidate push on the candidate that you want to vote for, and then hit confirm. Easy, easy, easy.
Awesome. Can a person find out exactly what's on her ballot before she goes in to vote?
There's a couple different voter guides. Move San Antonio's got a great millennial-focused voter guide. The League of Women Voters does a phenomenal voter guide as well that will help you look at each of the candidates in the race in a nonpartisan way and find out who you want to vote for. They will also point you directly to the candidate's website so you can do your own research and verify.
Awesome. So Facebook alone, that's not going to do it. So Drew, let's continue following our first-time voter. She is now well-informed, registered, and ready to vote, but she doesn't have a ride to the polls. What should she do?
There's a couple different things she can do. So first off, here in San Antonio, VIA, the public bus system, offers free rides to the polls on Election Day. So if you bring your voter registration card, you can ride the bus directly to the polls. They won't even charge you for it. Also, there's ways for you to call different candidates, different organizations, and they will give you free rides to the polls as well.
Beth, what if a first-time voter is scheduled to work on Election Day and she needs that money to pay her rent? Is that necessarily the end of her plans to vote?
No, it's not, thank goodness. So the general rule is for a worker who works an 8-to-5 job is they should be allowed to have 2 hours to go vote, and it's time that they should be paid for, and that's under state law.
Awesome. Yeah. Beth, what sorts of additional barriers might some eligible voters face when they show up to vote? And what should an eligible voter do if she's blocked from placing her vote and needs help?
So one of them Drew touched on is the confusion between where you can vote during early voting and where you can vote on Election Day. Election Day is more strict. You have to vote at your polling location in Bexar County. And so that is something that we've seen is confusing for voters who show up on Election Day thinking they can vote kind of anywhere, like by their work, and aren't able to cast a ballot at that place. It's one issue we see a lot. Another is kind of confusion over what photo ID is required. And as Drew said, you can go to the Secretary of State's website, but generally they're IDs that are provided by the Department of Public Safety, so your driver's license, you can use a passport, you can use a U.S. citizenship certificate that has your photo, you can use a military ID, and then also a gun license in Texas. And so I think the thing to remember there is look on the website, come prepared, and then if you know that you have the proper ID, making sure to kind of stand up for yourself, because there has been confusion in the past among the people working the polls about what is actually required. And so that leads me to the next step, is if you get there and you have a question, kind of any issue that you face, you do not have to go through casting a ballot right there on the spot. You can back out and say, actually, I'm going to call someone, and we have a hotline that can help voters. And it's 866-OUR-VOTE. It is a hotline that is answered by attorneys who are well versed in election law and can help voters kind of work through the process right on the spot. And then we also have folks that are at various polling locations across the state. Not everyone, because we need volunteers, but we have people that are able to answer questions kind of face to face as well. And so I think those are kind of the two things you can arm yourself with as you go in as a first-time voter, is have confidence that you belong there. And if you face kind of adversity by the poll workers, step back and make a phone call to get some help.
Awesome. Let's take a closer look at the way that votes are tallied. What is gerrymandering, and what is its effect on democracy?
So the long and short of gerrymandering is the people in power getting to choose who the voters are that vote for them in their respective district. And what it means is the people who are currently in power have the authority to draw the boundaries around people, and then those people are going to then vote for them. And so what it does, the effect of it is the people in power can use their line drawing authority to cut people out that they don't want to vote in their race, and keep people in that they do want to vote in their race.
Beth, has gerrymandering in Texas used discriminatory tactics to block the democratic process and give an unfair advantage to one party over another in our elections?
Yes, absolutely. There's actually a case in front of the Supreme Court right now on this very question. And the lower court has found repeatedly that Texas did discriminate against Texas voters in a way that's improper, that is racially discriminatory against black voters and Latino voters. And the state's defense to that has been, actually, we discriminate against Democrats. And so we've got a problem in this country right now where legislators are using as a defense that they are discriminating against the opposite party, and the effect of that is discriminating against people of color.
Yeah. Drew, the millennial generation is said to be less focused on party affiliation and more focused on the issues that matter the most to themselves, their communities, and their families. Is this consistent with what you are observing out in the field?
Absolutely. And that's what drives them to get out and get engaged.
Awesome. Drew, which two public policy issues seem to resonate most strongly with young voters in San Antonio?
We heard public transportation and we heard health care.
Why is it important for voters to place their ballots in state and municipal elections?
So when we think about voting, we think most prominently about voting for president, but your voice really amplifies in local elections and even state elections where there's not really high turnout. So the more you get involved in those elections, the more voice that you and your friends and your classmates and your family have.
Awesome. Drew, can you give us an example of a community-based issue that has been recently or might soon be addressed by San Antonio voters?
Absolutely, Kinyo. So there's a community effort around paid sick time right now that's happening in San Antonio that is really, really fascinating. So groups across the city have gotten enough signatures and presented them to City Hall to start a conversation on requiring businesses to give paid sick time to employees all across our city. That's a really interesting proposition for young people who are the backbone of the service industry and the tourism industry here in San Antonio.
Awesome. What can undocumented immigrants do to help shape the community in which they live?
Voting is not the only way to get involved in democracy. There's ways for you to show up at rallies and at protests and at other different community events. At City Hall, there's always citizens to be heard, so you can show up every single week and let the mayor, let city council know what your thoughts on public policy are, and you don't have to be a voter to do that. And then there's also ways that you can go and block walk, knock on doors, tell other people about potential issues that are important to you, share your story, and that's an incredible way to get involved in the community that doesn't revolve around just voting.
What do you hope that sweet, sweet democracy will look like in Texas?
In a nutshell, that would be informed and active eligible voters across the state of Texas. Breaking that down, for voter registration, that would be online voter registration and same-day voter registration, which means when you go to cast your ballot, you can register to vote right then and there. It would look like requiring ID that is not a photo ID, so that we don't shut people out of our democratic process. It would look like a decision that political gerrymandering is illegal. And automatic voter registration is absolutely should be part of our sweet, sweet democracy.
Is that vision an obtainable reality?
It absolutely is. It starts with an engaged populace in Texas to push our state and local governments to then affect the policy changes that have to happen to make it a reality. Democracy is government for the people, by the people, and it takes all of our participation in that.
That's what we need to make the future of democracy even sweeter in Texas.
We'd like to thank Drew and Beth for joining us today. It's been very educational and inspirational to learn about the work they're doing to foster sweet, sweet democracy. Abraham Lincoln is quoted as saying, "Elections belong to the people. It's their decision if they decide to turn their backs to the fire and burn their behinds. Then they will have to sit on their blisters." That is true, but the blisters impact all of us, and the cure is voting. You can learn more about these topics and our organization Growing Empowered Together by visiting the sites listed on the screen.